Sometimes a man's greatest strength comes not from his sword, but from his willingness to help strangers in need. Even the most hardened warriors can find their hearts softened by the sight of those who cannot defend themselves. Grimr Thriceborn was walking through a deadly blizzard when he found two young women buried in the snow. He was a giant of a man who had survived countless battles. He carried them to safety in his mountain cave and warmed them by his fire. When they woke up, the twin sisters looked at him with calm eyes. They asked him something that shocked him to his core. What could two helpless girls possibly say that would leave a fearless warrior speechless? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind had been howling across the Whitefang Mountains for 3 days now, but Grimr Thriceborn paid it no mind. He had weathered storms that would break lesser men, and this blizzard was merely another test from the gods, one he would endure as he had endured all others. His massive frame moved with practiced ease through the knee-deep snow, each step deliberate and sure despite the whiteout conditions that would leave most travelers lost and frozen. At 7 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry a horse, Grimr cut an imposing figure, even wrapped in his thick wolf fur cloak. His beard, streaked with early grey despite his 38 years, was encrusted with ice that clicked softly as he breathed. The bone pendant hanging from his neck, a carving of a raven that had belonged to his father, tapped rhythmically against his chest with each step. It was the only piece of his old life he had kept when he retreated to these mountains 5 years ago. The path to his cave was treacherous even in fair weather, a narrow ledge that wound around the mountainside like a scar. In this storm, it was nearly invisible, marked only by the wooden posts he had driven into the rock face during his first winter here. Each post bore a small notch, his way of counting the steps home when the world disappeared into white nothing. Grimr had chosen this isolation deliberately. After watching his warband die in the Battle of Iron River, after surviving what no man should survive for the 3rd time in his life, he had walked away from everything. The other warriors called him Thriceborn because he had returned from death's door 3 times, once from a spear through his lung, once from a poisoned blade that should have stopped his heart, and once from a fall that left him broken on the rocks for 2 days before he somehow crawled to safety. His men had thought it made him blessed. Grimr knew better. It made him cursed. The curse wasn't in the dying, it was in the living afterward, knowing that others had taken his place in Valhalla. Good men, better men than he would ever be, had fallen while he continued to draw breath. So he had come here, to these peaks where the wind never stopped mourning and the cold bit deep enough to remind him daily that he was still alive when he should not be. His cave sat halfway up the mountain's northern face, invisible from below and accessible only by the path he had carved with his own hands. Inside, it was surprisingly comfortable. Over 5 years, he had expanded the natural chamber into something that could house a family. He had carved sleeping alcoves into the walls, lined them with furs, and built a hearth that drew the smoke up through a natural chimney in the rock. Shelves held his supplies, dried meat, preserved vegetables, tools for hunting and repair. In one corner sat his father's war axe, its handle worn smooth by generations of hands, its steel head still sharp enough to split a hair. The axe had been his inheritance, passed down through a line of warriors, stretching back to the days when giants walked openly among men. His father, Hakon the Bold, had carried it in 40 battles and died with it in his hands. His grandfather, Ulf Ironarm, had used it to slay a dragon that terrorized the coastal villages. The weapon held their memories, their strength, their honor, everything Grimr felt he had lost. Most days he hunted. The mountains held elk and bear, wolves and mountain cats. He knew every game trail, every watering hole, every cave where the animals sheltered from storms. He hunted only what he needed, took only what the mountain could spare, and always left offerings for the spirits that dwelled in these high places. It was a simple life, a clean life, free from the politics and betrayals that had marked his years as a warrior. In the evenings, he would sit by his fire and remember. He would speak the names of his fallen friends to the flames, telling them about his day as if they were still there to listen. Torben, who could split an arrow with another arrow at 100 paces. Olaf, whose laugh could lift the spirits of a defeated army. Eric the Young, barely 18 when a Saxon sword took his head. They visited him sometimes in dreams, asking why he had lived when they had not. He never had an answer. The loneliness was a weight he carried like armor, heavy but necessary. He had tried to return to normal life after Iron River, had spent a winter in the mead halls, telling war stories and accepting the praise of men who had never seen real battle. But every laugh felt like mockery of the dead, every toast like betrayal. The noise of human company had become unbearable, a constant reminder that he was surrounded by the living while the best men he had ever known lay cold in the ground. So he had taken what little he owned and climbed these peaks until he found a place where the only voices were those of wind and weather, where the only company was the memory of those he had failed to save. It was not happiness, but it was peace of a sort. Or it had been, until tonight. The storm had caught him 2 miles from home, returning from a successful hunt with a winter hare slung over his shoulder. The wind had shifted suddenly, bringing with it a cold that seemed to reach into his very bones. This was not natural weather, it carried with it something else, something that made the hair on his arm stand up beneath his furs. The mountain spirits were restless tonight, whispering warnings in a language older than human speech. He had been pushing through the worst of it when he saw them, 2 dark shapes huddled against a boulder, nearly invisible in the swirling snow. At first, he thought they might be wolves seeking shelter, but as he drew closer, his blood went cold. They were human. Young women, by the look of them, their cloaks inadequate for this killing weather. They should have been dead. No one could survive exposed to this storm for more than an hour. Yet here they were, still breathing, their faces peaceful, as if they were merely sleeping. They were identical, the same dark hair, the same pale skin, the same delicate features that spoke of nobility or at least comfortable upbringing. Sisters, certainly. Twins, most likely. But what were they doing here, so far from any settlement, dressed for a spring day rather than a mountain winter? Grimr had scooped them up without hesitation, one in each arm, surprised by how light they were. Even unconscious, they seemed to cling to each other, their hands finding each other across his broad chest as he carried them toward home. Their skin was cold as winter stone, but not the waxy cold of the truly frozen. Somehow, impossibly, they lived. The climb back to his cave tested even his strength. The wind fought him at every step, trying to tear his precious burden from his arms. Snow stung his eyes, making it nearly impossible to see the marker posts that guided his way. But he had walked this path in fair weather and foul for 5 years. His feet knew the way, even when his eyes failed him. Inside the cave, he laid them carefully on his own sleeping furs near the fire. They looked even younger in the firelight, perhaps 20 years, certainly no more. Their clothes, while fine, were completely unsuitable for mountain travel. Silk and wool meant for indoor comfort, not outdoor survival. Their boots were soft leather, designed for walking on cobblestones, not climbing mountain paths. As he built up the fire and heated water for warming cloths, Grimr found himself wondering who they were and how they had come to be here. There were no settlements within 50 miles, no roads that led anywhere near this place. The nearest village was 3 days' hard travel down the mountain, and that only if you knew the way. These young women should not exist, could not exist, in this place at this time. Yet here they lay, breathing softly by his fire, their identical faces serene despite their brush with death. Whatever had brought them here, whatever strange fate had placed them in his path, Grimr knew his life had just changed forever. He was no longer alone in his mountain refuge, and something deep in his warrior's instincts told him that before this night was over, Everything he thought he knew about his world was going to prove wrong. They woke as one, their eyes opening simultaneously like flowers greeting the dawn. Grimr had been watching them for hours, keeping vigil by the fire, when suddenly both pairs of identical blue eyes fixed upon him with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably on his wooden stool. "You saved us," the one on the left said softly. "We are grateful," the one on the right continued, as if completing the same thought. Grimr cleared his throat, suddenly feeling awkward in his own cave. "You were freezing. Any man would have done the same." He gestured toward a pot hanging over the fire. "There's warm broth when you're ready, and dry clothes, though they'll be far too large." The sisters sat up slowly, moving with an eerie synchronization that made the hair on Grimr's neck stand up. They wore matching silver brooches on their traveling cloaks, ravens with wings spread wide, the metalwork so fine it seemed the birds might take flight at any moment. "I am Era," said the one, whose hair fell slightly more to the left. "And I am Svala," said the other, her voice identical in tone and timbre. "Grimr Thriceborn," he replied, though something told him they already knew his name. "What brings two young ladies to the high mountains in winter?" "These peaks aren't safe for we came seeking you," they said in perfect unison, their voices creating an odd harmonic that seemed to resonate in the stone walls around them. Grimr blinked. "Me? That's impossible. No one knows I live here." Era tilted her head slightly. "The raven dreams told us where to find you. Mother's spirit guided our steps," Svala added. "Your mother sent you into a killing storm to find a hermit warrior?" Grimr's voice carried the skepticism of a man who had seen too much of the world's cruelty to believe in convenient coincidences. The sisters exchanged a look that spoke of shared secrets and burdens too heavy for their young shoulders. When they turned back to him, their expressions had shifted from gratitude to something far more serious. "We need your help," Era began. "With something that no one else can do," Svala continued. Grimr leaned back against the cave wall. "I'm retired from helping people. Whatever trouble you're in, whatever enemy you're running from, you've come to the wrong man. I'll see you safely down the mountain when the storm passes, but that's all I can offer." The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Outside, the wind howled its lonely song, but inside the cave, silence stretched like a drawn bowstring. Finally, Era spoke. "We need you to help us kill a god." The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Grimr stared at them, certain he had misheard. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "Help us kill Loki," Svala said calmly, as if she were asking him to help them move a heavy stone. Grimr laughed, a harsh, barking sound with no humor in it. "Kill a god? You're both suffering from the cold. Your minds aren't clear. Gods can't be killed by mortal weapons, can't be harmed by mortal hands. They're not mortal, yes," Era interrupted. "But they can be bound. They can be stopped. And we know how," Svala added. As she spoke, the silver raven brooches on their cloaks began to glow with a soft, blue-white light that had nothing to do with the firelight. The illumination grew stronger, pulsing in rhythm with their heartbeats, until the entire cave was bathed in an otherworldly radiance. Grimr's hand moved instinctively to the handle of a knife at his belt, then stopped. Whatever these young women were, they weren't entirely human. The realization should have terrified him, but instead, he felt a strange calm settling over his mind. "Show me," he said quietly. Era reached into her travel pack and withdrew an object wrapped in dark cloth. When she unwrapped it, Grimr saw a stone tablet, no larger than his hand, covered in runes that seemed to shift and writhe in the strange light from their brooches. The symbols hurt to look at directly, as if they contained more meaning than mortal eyes were meant to process. "This was our mother's," Svala explained. "Her dying gift to us, along with a burden we never asked for. We were born during the conjunction of 3 moons," Era continued. Born at the moment when the veils between worlds were thinnest, our mother was a vulva, a seer of great power. She foresaw what Loki would become. Grimr studied the runestone, his warrior's mind already cataloguing questions and doubts. What would he become? The light from their brooches pulsed brighter, and when they spoke next, their voices carried harmonics that seemed to come from the stone itself, the destroyer of chains, the ender of oaths, the one who will bring about the final twilight of the gods and plunge all the 9 realms into eternal darkness. Images flashed through Grimr's mind, visions that felt more real than memory. He saw forests withering, seas boiling, the very foundations of Midgard cracking like broken pottery. He saw Loki standing triumphant over the corpses of gods and men alike, his laughter echoing across a dead cosmos. Grimr started, then stopped. The visions felt true in a way that made his soul ache. Why me? I'm just one man, not even a particularly good one. Era's expression softened with something that might have been pity. Because you've died 3 times and returned, because the Norns have marked you as one who stands between life and death, because you're the only mortal warrior whose soul has been touched by both realms, and because you have nothing left to lose, Svala added, with brutal honesty. The truth of those words hit him like a physical blow. She was right. He had no family, no friends, no ties to the world below. His warband was dead, his purpose lost, his honor tarnished by survival itself. What did he have to lose that he hadn't already lost? Even if what you're saying is true, he said slowly, how could mortals hope to challenge a god? Loki is cunning beyond measure, powerful beyond imagining. He's bound by the same rules that govern all divine beings. Era finished. Gods can be tricked, defeated, imprisoned. They have weaknesses, blind spots, moments of vulnerability. Svala held up the runestone, its symbols now glowing so brightly they cast shadows on the far walls. This stone contains the secret knowledge our mother died to preserve. The location of 3 divine artifacts that, when brought together, can forge bonds stronger than any chain Loki can break. But the artifacts are hidden across the 9 realms, Era warned, guarded by powers that consider mortals less than insects. The journey will likely kill us all. And even if we succeed in gathering them, Svala added, using them requires a sacrifice that none of us may be willing to make. Grimr looked from one sister to the other, seeing determination in their eyes that reminded him of his own men preparing for a hopeless battle. They meant to do this thing, with or without his help. 2 young women against forces that had shaped the cosmos since the dawn of time. You're going to try this whether I help you or not, aren't you? Yes, they said together. Then you'll die, he said bluntly. Whatever power you have, whatever knowledge your mother left you, it won't be enough. Not for something like this. Era smiled sadly. Perhaps, but if we do nothing, everyone dies anyway. At least this way there's a chance. Grimr stood and walked to the cave mouth, staring out at the storm that was finally beginning to weaken. The wind still howled, but there were breaks. In the snow now, glimpses of star-touched sky beyond the clouds. By morning the weather would clear, and he could guide them safely down to the valley. Or he could listen to 2 young women speak of killing gods and saving the world. The rational part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through 3 deaths and countless battles, screamed at him to refuse. But another part, a part he thought had died with his warband, stirred to life for the first time in 5 years. When he turned back to face them, his decision was written in the set of his shoulders. If we're going to do this, he said quietly, we'll need a better plan than hope and divine artifacts. And first, you're going to tell me everything about what your mother foresaw. The storm broke with the dawn, leaving the world crystalline and sharp under a pale winter sun. Inside the cave, Era spread the runestone map across Grimr's wooden table, its ancient surface coming alive with shifting symbols that seemed to dance in the morning light, filtering through the cave mouth. 3 artifacts, she said, tracing her finger along lines that appeared and disappeared like frost on glass, hidden by the gods themselves when they realized what Loki might become. Grimr leaned over the stone, his breath misting in the cold air. The runes hurt his eyes to look at directly, but when he caught them in his peripheral vision, they almost made sense, like trying to remember a half-forgotten dream. The first is a shard of Gleipnir, Svala explained, her finger hovering over a section of the map that showed towering mountains made of ice. The chain that once bound Fenrir, broken when the wolf grew too large for even divine bonds to hold. A fragment remains in the realm of the frost giants. The second, Era continued, pointing to what looked like a dark forest filled with twisted trees, is a piece of Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, broken in an ancient battle with forces even he feared to name. Dark elves guard it in their deepest vaults. And the third? Grimr asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Odin's sacrificial dagger, they said in unison, hidden in the roots of Yggdrasil itself, where the All-Father pierced his own side to gain the wisdom of the runes. Grimr straightened, running a hand through his beard. So we need to steal from frost giants, dark elves, and the world tree. That's not a quest that's elaborate suicide. Perhaps, Era said calmly, but our mother's vision showed another path. She saw you, Grimr Thriceborn, standing at the crossroads of fate with these artifacts in your hands. She also saw darkness consuming everything if we fail, Svala added quietly. A low, growling from outside the cave interrupted their planning. Grimr's hand went instantly to his knife, his warrior instincts flaring to life. The sound was wrong. No natural wolf made that kind of noise, so deep it seemed to vibrate through the stone itself. They've found us, Era whispered, her face going pale. Who has found us? Grimr demanded, moving toward the cave mouth. Loki's servants, Svala replied, rising from her seat. The god has many eyes in the wilderness, many ears among the creatures that fear the light. Grimr peered carefully around the stone opening. Below on the narrow path, 3 wolves stood in perfect formation. They were larger than any wolves he had ever seen, their eyes glowing red as forged coals in the morning light. Frost clung to their dark fur, but it was not the white frost of winter. It was black as midnight, spreading across the stone wherever they stepped. "Can we fight them?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the sisters' expressions. "Not those," Era said. "They're not truly wolves anymore. Loki's corruption has made them something else." "Something hungry," Svala added. The lead wolf lifted its massive head and howled a sound that seemed to come from the depths of Niflheim itself. The howl echoed across the mountains, and Grimr knew it was a summons. More would come. "We leave now," he said, moving to his weapons rack. "There's another way out of this cave, a path I carved through the back wall. We can—" "No," Era interrupted. "Running will only delay the inevitable. These creatures won't stop hunting us, and they're faster than any mortal can travel." Grimr turned to stare at her. "Then what do you suggest?" "We make our stand here," Svala said, reaching for her travel pack. "But first, we need to see if the prophecies spoke truly about you." Before Grimr could ask what she meant, Era pulled something from her pack, a leather wrap containing various small objects. She selected what looked like a common river stone and held it out to him. "Take this to your father's axe," she instructed. "Hold both, and think of the men you've lost. This is hardly the time for—" "Do it," both sisters said together, their voices carrying such authority that Grimr found himself obeying without conscious thought. He crossed to the corner, where his father's war axe waited, its steel head gleaming despite years of disuse. The weapon felt familiar in his hands, perfectly balanced, alive with memories of past battles. When he touched the stone to the axe handle, the world exploded into light. Visions flooded his mind, not the painful memories of loss and failure he expected, but something far older and deeper. He saw his father wielding this same axe against creatures of shadow and flame. He saw his grandfather standing firm against a dragon whose breath could melt stone. Further back, always further back, the bloodline stretched warriors who had stood between the mortal world and forces that sought to unmake it entirely. The stone in his hand grew warm, then hot, then blazing like a star. The axe began to resonate, its steel humming with harmonics that seemed to answer the power flowing from the stone. When the vision finally faded, Grimr found himself standing in the center of the cave, the weapon in his hands glowing with the same blue-white radiance that emanated from the sisters' brooches. "What did you do to me?" he gasped. "Nothing," Ira said with satisfaction. "We simply awakened what was already there. Your bloodline carries more than just the memory of warriors, Grimr. It carries their purpose." The howling outside grew louder, joined now by other voices. Through the cave mouth, Grimr could see shapes moving on the paths below, more wolves, and things that might once have been wolves, but were now something worse. "The test was necessary," Svala explained, gathering her belongings. "The path ahead requires more than mortal strength. But you are not merely mortal, are you? You've died 3 times and returned. Each death marked you, changed you, prepared you for this moment." Grimr looked down at the axe in his hands, still glowing with divine fire. The weapon felt different now, not just a tool of war, but a key to doors he hadn't known existed. "I don't understand any of this. Understanding comes with time," Ira said, shouldering her pack. "For now, survival is enough." A scraping sound echoed from the back of the cave, claws on stone getting closer. The creatures had found the hidden passage. "They're coming from both directions," Grimr observed, his tactical mind automatically assessing their situation. "We're trapped." "No," Svala said, moving to stand beside her sister in the center of the cave. "We're exactly where we need to be." The twins joined hands, their raven brooches flaring to brilliant life. The light filled the cave, driving back shadows that had nothing to do with the absence of sun. When they spoke, their voices carried the weight of prophecy itself. "Choose, Grimr Thriceborn. Die here as a hermit, forgotten and alone, or live as the warrior you were meant to be. Stand with us and help us forge a chain that can bind a god." The first of the corrupted wolves appeared at the cave mouth, its red eyes fixed on them with hunger and malice. Behind it, others gathered, their black frost spreading across the stone like a plague. Grimr hefted his glowing axe, feeling purpose flow through him for the first time in 5 years. Whatever these young women were, whatever power they carried, they had given him something he thought he had lost forever, a reason to fight. "Together then," he said, stepping forward to meet the darkness. "But after this, you tell me everything about what your mother really saw in her visions." The battle was unlike anything Grimr had ever experienced. The corrupted wolves moved with supernatural speed and coordination, but his father's axe sang through the air as if guided by divine will. Each swing left trails of blue fire that carved through shadow and flesh alike, and where the blessed steel struck, the creature's dark frost burned away like morning mist. Era and Svala fought in perfect synchronization, their movements a deadly dance that spoke of power far beyond their apparent youth. Light poured from their joined hands, creating barriers that turned aside claws and fangs, while their voices rose in harmonies that made the cave walls themselves vibrate with protective force. "The passage!" Svala shouted over the din of battle, more coming through the back. Grimr spun, his axe cleaving through the skull of a wolf the size of a horse, and saw shapes pouring through the hidden entrance he had carved years ago. Not just wolves, now things with too many teeth, creatures that walked upright but moved like spiders, shadows that had somehow gained substance and malice. "We can't hold them," he called back, though his warrior's heart sang at being in battle once more. The ache of purposelessness that had plagued him for 5 years was gone, replaced by the clear focus of combat. "We don't need to hold them," Era replied, her voice strangely calm despite the chaos. "We just need to reach the ledge." Before Grimr could ask what ledge she meant, both sisters raised their free hands toward the cave ceiling. The stone above them began to crack, hairline fractures spreading like a spider's web across the rocky surface. With a sound like thunder, a section of the roof collapsed, revealing a hidden opening that led upward into darkness. "A way our mother prepared," Svala explained breathlessly. She knew this day would come. "Move!" Grimr barked, falling back toward the new opening as more corrupted creatures poured into the cave. His axe work was methodical now, each swing calculated to buy them precious seconds rather than achieve decisive victory. The twins went first, their supernatural grace allowing them to climb the rough stone chimney with spider-like agility. Grimr followed, his massive frame less suited to the narrow passage, but driven by necessity and the howls of frustrated creatures below. They emerged onto a ledge he had never known existed, hidden on the mountain's eastern face, where the morning sun painted the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and rose. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter as the creatures struggled to follow through the cramped passage. "That won't stop them for long," Grimr said, checking the edge where the ledge dropped away into a 1,000-foot fall. "They'll find another way up." "Then we don't give them time," Era said, pulling the runestone from her pack. In the clear mountain air, its symbols seemed more stable, easier to read. The first artifact, the Shard of Gleipnir, lies in Jotunheim, the realm of the frost giants. "How exactly do we get to another realm?" Grimr asked, though he suspected the answer would strain his understanding of the possible. Svala smiled, the first genuine expression of joy he had seen from either sister. "The old ways still work, for those who remember them." She began to hum, a melody that seemed older than human speech. Era joined her, their voices weaving together in harmonies that made the air itself shimmer. The runestone in Era's hands grew brighter, its symbols now rotating slowly around its surface, like stars in their courses. The world began to change around them. The mountain ledge remained solid under their feet, but the landscape beyond started to shift. The neighboring peaks grew taller, more jagged, their snow taking on a blue-white gleam that spoke of cold deeper than any earthly winter. The sky darkened to the color of deep ice, and aurora lights began to dance overhead despite the morning hour. "Bifrost's lesser paths," Svala explained, seeing Grimr's amazement. "Not the Rainbow Bridge itself, but the smaller ways between worlds that the gods forgot to seal." The transition was disorienting, but mercifully brief. When the world settled around them again, they stood on a shelf of ice that jutted from a mountainside, composed entirely of frozen blue crystal. The air was so cold it burned their lungs, and their breath came out as clouds of glittering frost. "Welcome to Jotunheim," Era said, wrapping her cloak more tightly around her shoulders. Grimr looked out over a landscape that redefined his understanding of scale. Mountains rose around them that made his white-fanged peaks seem like hills. Glaciers flowed between them like frozen rivers, their surfaces carved with patterns that suggested conscious design. In the distance, structures that could only be called cities, carved from ice and stone, dotted the valleys, though their size suggested they were built for inhabitants far larger than any human. "The giants won't welcome mortal visitors," he observed, his warrior's eye already cataloguing defensive positions and escape routes. "No," Svala agreed, "but they respect strength, and they honor old debts. Your bloodline has history here, Grimr Thriceborn." Before he could ask what she meant, a sound like breaking mountains echoed across the frozen landscape. Something was coming, something vast enough to make the ice shelf beneath their feet vibrate with each step. "Grimr, son of Hakon, son of Ulf Ironarm," a voice boomed across the valleys, speaking the old tongue with an accent that predated human civilization. "You bear your grandfather's blade. Do you also carry his courage?" A figure appeared on a neighboring peak, humanoid, but easily 40 feet tall, its skin the color of glacier ice and its beard white as fresh snow. It wore armor that looked like it had been carved from a single massive sapphire, and in its hands was a club that could have served as the mast of a longship. "I am Utgard, king of the eastern reaches," the giant called. "Your grandfather once did me a service. I am minded to remember that debt if you prove worthy of his name." Eira touched Grimr's arm. "The shard of Gleipnir is in his keeping. This was foreseen." "What service did my grandfather do?" Grimr called back, his voice carrying remarkably well. In the thin air, the giant's laughter was like an avalanche. "He chose mercy over vengeance when he could have chosen otherwise, a rare thing among mortals. You must make the same choice, but first you must prove you are strong enough to deserve the choice." Utgard pointed his massive club toward a valley filled with what looked like a maze of ice walls. "Survive the trial of echoes, and we will speak of Gleipnir. Fail, and your bones will join those of the other mortals who thought themselves worthy of giant gifts." As if to emphasize his point, the giant gestured toward the maze's entrance, where bleached bones were indeed visible, embedded in the ice like grim decorations. "A trial, then," Grimr said, hefting his still glowing axe. "But I don't go alone." "Nor would we let you," Eira said firmly. Svala nodded. "We are bound together now, by purpose and prophecy. What faces one, faces all." The giant's expression softened slightly, as much as a face carved from living ice could soften. "Loyalty, another trait your grandfather valued. Very well, enter together, succeed together, or die together. The echoes care nothing for the distinction." As they began their descent toward the maze, Grimr found himself wondering what exactly his grandfather had done to earn a giant's respect, and whether he would prove worthy of that legacy. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit had finally stopped, the corrupted creatures apparently unable to follow across the barriers between worlds. For the moment, they were safe. But ahead lay challenges that would test not just their strength, but their very understanding of what was possible in a world where gods walked among mortals and ancient debts shaped the fate of realms. The trial of echoes was not what Grimr had expected. He had prepared for physical challenges, tests of strength, endurance, or combat skill that giants might use to measure a warrior's worth. Instead, the maze presented something far more insidious, reflections of their deepest fears and failures made manifest in ice and shadow. The walls were not merely frozen water, but crystallized memory, each surface showing distorted images of moments they would rather forget. Grimr saw himself standing over the bodies of his warband, their faces accusing him of living when they had died. Eira and Svala moved through reflections of a burning village, their mother's screams echoing from walls that showed her final, terrible sacrifice. "Don't look directly at them," Eira whispered, her voice strained. "The echoes feed on attention, grow stronger when observed." But avoiding the images was impossible when they covered every surface of the narrow passages. The maze forced them to confront their past while navigating an increasingly complex labyrinth that seemed to shift when they weren't looking directly at it. There, Svala pointed to a section of wall where the ice had taken on a golden hue. "The path continues through there, but it's blocked." Grimr finished, seeing the wall of solid ice that barred their way. In the golden ice, he could make out the shape of something small and dark, the shard of Gleipnir, suspended like an insect in amber. The fragment was no larger than his thumb, but it pulsed with power that made his awakened axe resonate in sympathetic harmony. "The trial isn't about reaching the center," Eira realized aloud. "It's about proving we understand what strength really means." A deep rumbling filled the maze, and Utgard's voice echoed from the walls themselves. "Your grandfather faced the same choice, mortal. Power offered freely, or wisdom earned through sacrifice. He chose wisdom. What will you choose?" The ice wall began to crack, but not from any force they had applied. Instead, it was responding to something deeper. The resonance between the artifact and Grimr's bloodline, the same connection that had awakened his axe. He could feel the power calling to him, promising strength beyond mortal limits. "I could break through," he said, hefting his glowing weapon. "The axe has the power now. I could claim the shard by force." "Yes," Svala said quietly. "But what would that make you?" In the reflecting walls around them, new images began to appear. They showed Grimr wielding godlike power, standing triumphant over fallen enemies, but his eyes were cold and empty, devoid of the compassion that had led him to save two strangers in a blizzard. They showed him becoming the very thing they sought to stop, a being so focused on victory that he had forgotten what he was fighting to protect. "Your grandfather's choice," Era said, understanding dawning in her voice. "He could have taken the giant's power by force, used it to become unstoppable. Instead, he chose to earn their respect through mercy." The echoes in the ice showed them the scene: Ulf Ironarm standing over a fallen giant child, his war axe raised for a killing blow. The child had been corrupted, turned into a weapon against its own people. But in that final moment, Ulf had seen past the corruption to the innocent soul trapped within. Instead of striking, he had used his own life force to break the curse, saving the child at the cost of his own strength. "The giant king's debt," Grimr murmured. "My grandfather saved his son, and proved that true strength lies not in the power to destroy, but in the wisdom to choose when not to use that power," Svala finished. Grimr looked at the shard, so close now that he could almost touch it through the ice. The easy path lay before him: break through, claim the artifact, continue their quest with godlike power at his disposal. But the hard path, the path his grandfather had walked, required something far more difficult: trust. He stepped back from the wall and lowered his axe. "I'm not here to take what belongs to the giants," he called out to the maze around them. "I'm here to ask for help in protecting something we all value: the balance between order and chaos. I ask not as a conqueror, but as a guardian." The rumbling intensified, and Utgard's laughter echoed through the crystalline passages. "Wisdom, indeed. Your grandfather would be proud." The golden ice began to melt, not from heat, but from some inner transformation that turned solid matter into flowing light. The shard of Gleipnir floated free, drifting toward Grimr's outstretched hand like a leaf carried on impossible winds. When it touched his palm, he felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settle on his shoulders. This was no mere piece of metal and magic. It was a fragment of the bonds that held reality itself together, a reminder that some things were too important to be grasped by force. The maze around them began to fade, its walls becoming transparent and then disappearing entirely. They stood once again on the ice shelf where they had begun, but now Utgard himself was there, not the 40-foot giant they had seen before, but a more manageable 12-foot figure whose eyes held depths of ancient wisdom. "The shard is yours," the giant king said formally. "But know that it comes with obligations. You now carry a piece of the order that keeps the 9 realms from falling into chaos. Use it wisely." "We will," Era promised, though her eyes were already on the runestone, checking their next destination. "And know this," Utgard continued, his voice growing serious. "Loki's corruption spreads even here. Some of my people whisper that chaos might be preferable to the pain of maintaining order. Be swift in your quest, mortals. The time of choosing approaches for all of us." As he spoke, Grimr noticed something that made his blood run cold. In the distance, moving across one of the great glaciers, was a figure that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Even at this distance, he could feel malevolence radiating from it like heat from a forge. "What is that?" he asked. Utgard's expression darkened. "One of Loki's hunting hounds, a Valkyrie he has turned to his service. She seeks you, Grimr Thriceborn. The trickster god knows you have begun to gather the artifacts." "How is that possible?" Svala demanded. We only just. Time moves differently when gods are involved, the giant king explained. What seems like moments to you may be days or weeks to others. Loki has had time to prepare. The dark figure on the glacier was moving faster now, its path clearly aimed at their location. Other shapes moved with it, things that flew through the frozen air on wings of shadow and malice. We need to leave, Ira said urgently, already reaching for the runestone. The next artifact, Alfheim, Svala finished, the realm of the dark elves. But they will not welcome us any more warmly than the giants did. At least the elves don't eat mortals for sport, Utgard observed with dry humor. Usually. As the sisters began their humming, preparing to open the paths between worlds, Grimr took one last look at the approaching darkness. The corrupted Valkyrie was close enough now that he could make out details, tattered wings that had once been white as fresh snow, armor blackened by forces that should not touch divine beings, eyes that burned with the same red fire as the wolves that had attacked them. She knows where we're going, he realized. Whatever power lets Loki corrupt divine beings, it also lets him track us across the realms. Then we move fast and trust in the prophecies, Era said, as the world began to shift around them once more. And we pray that the next guardians prove as reasonable as the giant king. The last thing Grimr saw of Jotunheim was the corrupted Valkyrie reaching their former position, her scream of frustration echoing across the frozen peaks like the cry of a hunting hawk deprived of its prey. Alfheim was a realm of perpetual twilight, where trees of silver and gold grew in forests that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. The air shimmered with magic so thick it was almost visible, and whispers in languages older than human speech drifted through leaves that chimed like bells when the wind touched them. They materialized on a platform of woven moonbeams suspended high in the canopy, the runestone's power depositing them among branches that could have housed entire cities. Below them, the forest floor was lost in mists that glowed with their own inner light, while above, stars wheeled in patterns that hurt to contemplate directly. The dark elves are not truly dark, Era explained as they descended along a spiraling path that had been grown rather than built. They are the shadow dwellers, the ones who work in spaces between light and darkness. They forge things that should not exist and guard secrets that gods have forgotten. Grimr felt the weight of the Gleipnir shard in his pack, its presence a constant reminder of how much they had already risked. And they have a piece of Thor's hammer? Not just any piece, Svala said, her voice subdued. The core fragment, the part that contained the thunder god's own heart strength. It was broken in the battle against the unnamed Dark, when Thor struck a blow so mighty it cracked reality itself. The path led them through groves, where the trees bore fruit that looked like captured stars, past pools that reflected not their faces but their souls, until they reached a clearing where the very air seemed to pulse with waiting presence. In the center stood a structure that defied easy description, part tree, part building, part living sculpture of crystallized moonlight. State your purpose in the realm of shadows and secrets, a voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere at once. 3 figures emerged from the tree structure, their forms shifting between solid matter and something more ethereal. They were tall and graceful as all elves, but their skin held the deep blue-black of midnight sky, and their eyes were pools of starlight that seemed to contain infinite depths. "I am Valdris, keeper of broken things," the central figure said, its voice carrying harmonics that resonated in their bones. "These are my companions, Nightweave and Thornwhisper. You seek something that was shattered in service to the light." "We do," Grimr replied carefully, remembering Utgard's warning about the different ways various races measured respect. "But we come not as thieves, but as a sound like tearing silk cut through the twilight air above them." The corrupted Valkyrie had found them again, her dark wings creating rifts in the magical atmosphere as she descended with a hunting party of shadow creatures. "Raven's daughter," Valdris hissed, the elf's form solidifying into something more weapon than person. "She brings corruption to our sacred groves." The battle was joined before any of them could speak another word. The Valkyrie dove toward Ira with claws that left trails of absolute darkness, but Grimr intercepted her, his awakened axe meeting her talons in a shower of sparks that burned through multiple spectrums of light. "You cannot protect them forever, mortal," the Valkyrie snarled, her voice the sound of winter wind through dead leaves. "Lord Loki sees all, knows all. Your quest is doomed to failure. Then why does he need you to stop us?" Grimr shot back, spinning away from her follow-up attack and bringing his axe around in an arc that forced her to retreat skyward. Meanwhile, Eira and Svala fought back-to-back against the shadow creatures, their combined light creating barriers that held back the tide of darkness. But Grimr could see the strain on their faces. This fight was costing them more than the battle in the cave had. That's when he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. Svala was fighting differently than her sister. Where Eira's movements were defensive, protective, focused on keeping the creatures at bay, Svala's attacks carried a viciousness that bordered on savage. More troubling still, some of her light barriers flickered with the same red tinge he had seen in the corrupted wolf's eyes. The elves joined the battle with weapons forged from crystallized starlight, their graceful movements turning combat into something resembling deadly dance. But even with their help, the tide of shadow creatures seemed endless. Pouring from rifts, the Valkyrie tore in the air with her corrupted divine power. The hammer fragment, Nightweave called out during a brief lull in the fighting. It can seal the rifts, but only if wielded by one who understands sacrifice. Valdris pointed toward the tree structure, where a golden light pulsed from within its twisted trunk. "In the heart chamber, where Thor's pain is kept. But the Guardians will test you even as battle rages." Grimr looked between the ongoing fight and the path Valdris indicated. Leaving the sisters to face the Valkyrie alone felt like abandonment, but they needed that artifact. If any of them were going to survive this. "Go," Eira called to him, seeing his hesitation. "We can hold them. I'm not leaving you." "You're not," she said firmly, her light flaring brighter as she pushed back 3 shadow creatures at once. "You're trusting us to do our part while you do yours." The words struck him like a physical blow, echoing his grandfather's choice to trust in mercy over force. This was the same test, wearing a different face, the willingness to let others carry their share of the burden instead of trying to bear everything alone. He ran for the tree structure, leaving the sounds of battle behind. Inside, the walls pulsed with captured thunder, and the air tasted of copper and ozone. The path spiraled downward into chambers that existed in spaces between heartbeats, until he reached a room where a fragment of metal no larger than his fist hung suspended in a web of lightning. But between him and the hammer fragment stood a figure he recognized from the reflecting walls of the giant's maze himself, but changed. This version of Grimr bore scars he didn't have, wore armor black as midnight, and carried an axe that drank light instead of giving it. His eyes held the same red corruption they had seen in the Valkyrie. "You could be so much more," his dark reflection said. "Take the fragment by force. Use its power to remake yourself into something worthy of the task ahead. Stop pretending that mercy and sacrifice make you strong." "They don't make me strong," Grimr replied, raising his true axe. "They make me worthy of strength." The battle with his own shadow was the hardest fight of his life, because his corrupted reflection knew every move he would make before he made it. But in the end, it was not superior skill that won the day. It was the moment when he chose to lower his weapon instead of pressing an attack, offering his dark self the same mercy his grandfather had shown to the giant child. The shadow Grimr paused, confusion flickering across features that mirrored his own. In that moment of hesitation, the thunder fragment's true power awakened, not to destroy the corruption, but to transform it back into something pure. When he emerged from the tree structure with Thor's heart strength in his hands, the battle above was nearly over. The hammer fragment's power allowed him to seal the rifts the Valkyrie had torn, cutting off her reinforcements and forcing her to retreat with a promise of future vengeance. But as the elves helped tend their wounds and the adrenaline of battle began to fade, Grimr noticed something that chilled him more than any threat the corrupted Valkyrie could make. In the aftermath of the fight, when she thought no one was looking, Svala touched her raven brooch with trembling fingers, and for just a moment, it flickered with the same red light he had learned to associate with Loki's corruption. The journey to Yggdrasil, the World Tree, should have taken them through the heart of Asgard, where the gods themselves dwelled in golden halls. Instead, the runestone guided them along hidden paths that skirted the edges of divine attention, through realms where twilight reigned eternal and the very air whispered of secrets too dangerous for mortal ears. They traveled in silence for much of the way, each lost in their own thoughts about what lay ahead. The final artifact, Odin's sacrificial dagger, waited in the roots of the World Tree itself, in chambers where the All-Father had once hung himself in pursuit of wisdom. It would be the most dangerous retrieval yet, for those roots touched all 9 realms, and guardians beyond counting protected the secrets buried there. But Grimr's mind wasn't on the challenges ahead. It was on the woman walking beside him, and on the growing certainty that something was wrong with her sister. Eira had grown more beautiful to him with each passing day of their journey, her courage in battle and Brudi's gentle wisdom in quieter moments. Awakening feelings, he thought, had died with his warband. She moved with unconscious grace, her dark hair catching light that seemed to come from some inner radiance, and when she smiled at him, which she did more often now, his heart forgot its burden of years. Svala, on the other hand, had grown increasingly distant. She spoke only when necessary, and her eyes held shadows that had nothing to do with the twilight realms they traversed. Her raven brooch continued to flicker with that troubling red gleam when she thought no one was watching, and sometimes Grimr caught her murmuring words in a language that made his skin crawl. "There," Eira said, pointing ahead to where the path crested a ridge of crystalline stone. The World Tree. Nothing could have prepared Grimr for the reality of Yggdrasil. The tree rose from the center of all existence like a pillar supporting the cosmos itself, its trunk so vast that its far side disappeared beyond the temen curve of the world. Its branches held entire realms in their embrace, and its roots delved so deep that they anchored reality to something beyond mortal understanding. At the base of the tree, where the greatest roots emerged from ground that seemed to be made of compressed starlight, stood an archway carved from a single piece of amber. The golden stone pulsed with its own inner fire, and runic inscriptions spiraled around its frame in patterns that hurt to follow with the eye. "The entrance to the root chambers," Svala said, her voice strangely flat, "where Odin hung for 9 days and 9 nights, piercing himself with his own spear to gain the knowledge of the runes, and where his sacrificial dagger still rests," Eira added, consulting the runestone one final time. "Hidden in the chamber where wisdom was first won." They approached the archway with reverence appropriate to a place where gods had bled for knowledge. As they drew near, the amber began to resonate with a deep, thrumming sound that seemed to come from the very foundations of existence. "Stop," a voice commanded from within the archway. "Name yourselves, mortals, and speak your purpose in this most sacred place." A figure emerged from the golden light, tall and regal, wearing robes that shifted between deep blue and star-flecked black. An eye patch covered his left socket, and his remaining eye burned with the intensity of a blue star. Ravens perched on his shoulders, their dark eyes fixed on the 3 travelers with unsettling intelligence. "Odin, All-Father," Eira whispered, dropping to one knee. Grimr and Svala followed suit, though Grimr noticed that Svala's bow seemed somehow mocking, as if she were performing a role rather than showing genuine respect. "Rise," the god said, his voice carrying the weight of eons. "I know why you have come. The dagger that pierced my side, the blade that opened the way to runic wisdom, the tool that carved the first true sacrifice upon the altar of knowledge. You seek it to forge bonds that can hold my son. Your son. Grimr looked up, confusion clear on his face. Loki, Odin said simply. Blood brother by oath, if not by birth, bound to me by words spoken in the youth of the world. My greatest mistake and my most necessary burden. Then you'll help us? Hera asked, hopefully. The Allfather's expression grew sorrowful. I cannot help you, child of prophecy, but neither will I hinder you if you can pass the final test, for the dagger lies not in some treasure vault, but embedded in the very heart of sacrifice itself. To claim it, one of you must take my place. What do you mean? Svala asked, and there was something in her voice, eagerness perhaps, or anticipation, that made Grimr's blood run cold. The sacrifice must be renewed, Odin explained. Every generation, someone must hang upon the tree, pierced by their own hand, to keep the pathways of wisdom open. I have hung here for 1,000 years since my last respite. I grow weary, and my vigil weakens. If you would claim the dagger, one of you must take my place for the next 1,000 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Grimr felt his heart sink as the implications became clear. This wasn't just about retrieving an artifact, it was about condemning one of their number to an eternity of divine torment. I'll do it, he said without hesitation. My life is forfeit anyway. I should have died with my warband years ago. No, Hera said firmly. The prophecy speaks of twin daughters of power. It has to be one of us. The prophecy, Svala said, and now her voice carried undertones that seemed to come from somewhere far darker than her throat, speaks of many things, including truths that have been hidden from you both. She stepped forward, her hand moving to her raven brooch. As she touched it, the silver metal began to shift and change, taking on the black sheen of tarnished metal. The red gleam in its depths flared to life, and suddenly the air around her rippled with heat that had nothing to do with warmth. Svala, Hera whispered, horror dawning in her voice. My dear, trusting sister, Svala said, and when she smiled, her teeth gleamed like polished obsidian. Did you never wonder why the corrupted Valkyrie found us so easily? How she knew exactly where we would be, which paths we would take between the realms? The truth hit Grimr like a physical blow. You've been in contact with Loki all along. Not contact, Svala corrected, her form beginning to shimmer as whatever illusion had hidden her true nature started to fail. Partnership. You see, there were 2 prophecies about the twin daughters. Mother told you about the one where we worked together to bind a god. She never mentioned the one where one twin betrays the other to save her. Save me? Hera's voice broke. Svala, what have you done? What was necessary? Svala replied, and now her appearance was shifting rapidly. Her dark hair lightened to silver, her pale skin took on an alabaster perfection that belonged more to statues than living beings, and her eyes burned with the same red fire they had seen in every corrupted creature they had fought. Loki promised me a way to break the prophecy, she continued, a way to save you from the fate that awaited us. All I had to do was lead you here, to this place, at this time, when the barriers between the realms are thinnest. Odin stepped back, his expression shifting from sorrow to alarm. Child, what bargain have you made? The same bargain he offered you, All-Father, when you hung upon this tree. Knowledge in exchange for sacrifice. But I was cleverer than you. I found a way to make someone else pay the price. The air around them began to crack like glass, reality itself straining under the weight of whatever power Svala was channeling. Through the cracks, Grimr could see something moving, something vast and terrible and filled with an alien intelligence that regarded mortal suffering as entertainment. The true purpose of our quest was never to gather artifacts to bind Loki, Svala said, her voice now carrying harmonics that made the world tree's roots tremble. It was to gather them to free him, and the final component, Odin's sacrificial dagger, will cut the bonds that hold him to his punishment, allowing him to walk free across all the realms. But the prophecy, Era started, said that twin daughters would help determine Loki's fate. Svala finished. It never said they would work together to bind him. In the version Mother never shared, one betrays the other, and in that betrayal provides the god of lies with the tools he needs to break free. Loki's laughter echoed from the cracks in reality, a sound like breaking glass mixed with the screams of the damned. "Hello, brother," his voice called to Odin. "Did you miss me?" And then the cracks widened, and chaos itself began to pour through into the ordered realm of Yggdrasil, while Ira fell to her knees, her face a mask of betrayal and heartbreak at her sister's treachery. The world was breaking apart around them. Reality cracked like eggshell, revealing glimpses of the void between spaces where Loki had been imprisoned since the beginning of time. From those cracks poured creatures that had no names, beings of pure chaos that existed only to unmake the ordered cosmos the gods had built. Odin raised his spear, Gungnir, its point blazing with starfire as he sought to contain the spreading damage. But even the All-Father's power seemed insufficient against the tide of dissolution flowing from Loki's prison. "Foolish child," the god said to Svala, his voice heavy with centuries of regret. "Do you truly believe he will keep his promises? Loki's nature is to deceive, to corrupt, to destroy. Even if he saves your sister from the prophecy, he will damn her in ways you cannot imagine." Svala's transformed appearance rippled with buntes, uncertainty for a moment. He swore binding oaths. "To the god of lies," Grimr snarled, hefting his awakened axe as chaos spawn poured through the widening cracks. "You traded everything that mattered for the word of a being whose very existence is deception." But even as he spoke, Grimr felt a terrible understanding growing in his mind. The power that flowed through Svala wasn't entirely foreign. He had felt echoes of it during his 3 deaths and resurrections. Each time he had returned from the edge of oblivion, something had marked him, changed him, prepared him for this moment. "The prophecies never mentioned my resurrections," he said slowly, pieces of a vast puzzle clicking into place. 3 times I died, 3 times I returned. Why?" Era looked up from where she knelt, tears streaming down her face, but her mind still sharp, despite her emotional devastation. "The number of binding," she whispered. 3 artifacts, 3 realms, 3 sacrifices. The pattern has been building from the beginning." Odin's remaining eye widened with understanding. "The Norns wrote your fate in threads of death and resurrection, warrior. Each time you returned, you carried back a piece of the knowledge needed to forge bonds beyond breaking. You are not merely a hero in this tale. You are the anvil upon which it will be forged." From the largest crack in reality, Loki's voice emerged with terrifying clarity. "At last, brother mine, you begin to see the true scope of the web I have woven. Did you think I chose my servants randomly? The corrupted Valkyrie, the shadow wolves, even dear Svala here, all were tools to drive you exactly where I needed you to be." "What do you want?" Grimr demanded, though he feared he already knew the answer. "Freedom," came the reply, and the word carried such weight of longing that even Grimr felt a moment of sympathy. "For eons beyond counting, I have been chained in darkness, while the ordered cosmos grows stagnant and dies by degrees. I offer liberation from the tyranny of fate, the chance for all beings to choose their own destinies. By destroying everything that exists," Era said, struggling to her feet with her fists clenched. "By ending the lie that calls destruction evil," Loki corrected. "Creation and destruction are equally necessary, equally sacred. The gods have forgotten this truth, choosing instead to maintain their static paradise while possibility itself withers and dies." A new figure emerged from the cracks, not Loki himself, but something that might once have been the corrupted Valkyrie. She had grown larger, more terrible, her form now incorporating elements of storm and shadow that hurt to look upon directly. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the sound of breaking oaths and forgotten promises. "The artifacts, my lord," she said to the invisible presence beyond the cracks. "They have gathered 2 of the 3. Only the dagger remains." "Yes," Loki's voice purred with satisfaction. "And now comes the final revelation, the last twist in the tale that will bring all our threads together." He addressed Grimr directly, his words carrying power that made the world tree's roots tremble. "Tell me, warrior, what do you know of the weapon you carry? Your father's axe, your grandfather's legacy, the blade that has tasted the blood of 3 generations of your line." Grimr felt ice forming in his veins. "It's a family heirloom, nothing more." Nothing more. Loki's laughter was like the sound of civilizations falling. "Look again, with the eyes that death has given you." Against his will, Grimr found his vision changing, penetrating the surface reality to see the deeper truths beneath. The axe in his hands blazed not with the blue-white light he had grown accustomed to, but with something older and more terrible. In its steel, he could see the reflection of sacrifice, his grandfather giving up his own strength to save a giant child, his father dying with the weapon in his hands, and further back, sacrifice after sacrifice, stretching into the mists of legend. "Odin's dagger," he whispered, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. "This is Odin's dagger, reforged, the very blade that pierced the Allfather's side," Svala confirmed, her voice now carrying tones of triumph and despair in equal measure. "Passed down through your bloodline, waiting for the moment when it would be needed again. Loki knew, he has always known, that it would eventually come to you." Odin's face showed no surprise, only the weary acceptance of one who had seen this moment in prophetic dreams for centuries. "The weapon chose your line because they understood sacrifice. Each generation willing to give up their own strength to protect others, to serve something greater than themselves. And now," Loki's voice crescendoed with anticipation, "the final choice. Use the blade to cut my bonds and set me free, or watch as chaos consumes not just these realms, but all the others as well. The cracks are spreading, warrior. Soon they will reach Midgard, and every mortal you have ever sought to protect will die in agony." To emphasize his point, the largest crack suddenly widened, offering a glimpse into a parallel reality where Loki's freedom had already come to pass. Grimr saw familiar landscapes twisted into nightmare, saw the mountain village where he had once lived, burning under a sky that rained fire and shadows. "Choose quickly," the corrupted Valkyrie urged. "Lord Loki's patience is not infinite, and the cracks grow wider with each passing moment." Ira struggled to her feet, her face pale but determined. "There has to be another way. The prophecy spoke of binding, not releasing." "The prophecy spoke of twin daughters determining my fate," Svala interrupted. "And here we stand, divided, one who would bind, one who would free. The choice is no longer ours alone." She turned to Grimr, her expression pleading despite the corruption that flowed through her transformed features. "I know you care for Ira. I can see it in how you look at her, how you position yourself to protect her in battle. Free Lord Loki, and he will spare her. Continue to resist, and she dies when the chaos consumes everything." Grimr looked at the axe in his hands, the sacred dagger reforged, the tool of ultimate sacrifice that had been passed down through his bloodline for exactly this moment. The weight of cosmic responsibility pressed down on him like a mountain, and he understood at last why his grandfather had chosen mercy over vengeance, why his father had died fighting for others rather than seeking personal glory. The pattern was clear now. 3 artifacts to create binding chains, but the 3rd artifact was not something to be gathered, it was something to be sacrificed. The dagger had always been meant to be given up, used not as a tool of war, but as an instrument of willing surrender. "You're right about one thing," he said to Svala, his voice steady despite the chaos raging around them. The choice is mine to make. He looked at Era, memorizing her face, the curve of her cheek, the determined set of her jaw, even in the face of impossible odds. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "for what I'm about to do, and for what I failed to do." Then he pressed the sacred stone from his pack, the promise stone that bound him to protect both sisters against the blade of his reforged axe, feeling the ancient magic respond to his touch. "I choose sacrifice," he said firmly, "but not the sacrifice you expect." And with that declaration, he plunged the blade not toward Loki's bonds, but toward his own heart, calling upon the power of 3 deaths and 3 resurrections to forge something entirely new, a binding that would require not another's destruction, but his own willing transformation into something beyond mortal understanding. The moment the reforged dagger pierced Grimr's heart, the world exploded into light and shadow. But instead of dying, he felt his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of mortal flesh, touching the very foundations of reality itself. The 3 deaths he had endured, the 3 resurrections that had marked his soul, suddenly revealed their true purpose. They had prepared him to exist in the space between life and death, between order and chaos. Power flooded through him, not the destructive force he had expected, but something far more profound. He became a living bridge between opposing forces, a fulcrum upon which the balance of existence could pivot. Through his transformed awareness, he could feel the cracks in reality beginning to slow their spread, held back by the new stability his sacrifice had created. "Impossible," Loki's voice roared from beyond the dimensional barriers. "You cannot bind me with your own death. The patterns of fate do not allow it." "The patterns of fate," Odin said, his voice filled with wonder and sorrow in equal measure, "were always more complex than any of us understood. The Norns wove this moment from threads we could not see, possibilities we never imagined." But even as Grimr held the spreading chaos at bay, he could feel the strain of his transformation. His mortal form was dissolving, becoming something that existed more in concept than in flesh, and he knew he could not maintain this balance alone for long. "Era," he called out, his voice now carrying harmonics that resonated through multiple dimensions. "The binding requires completion. The twin daughters of prophecy must choose their path." Through his expanded awareness, he could see Svala struggling with the corruption that flowed through her transformed being. Loki's influence was strong, but underneath it, her love for her sister remained twisted and desperate, but real. "I can break the corruption," Era said, understanding flooding her features. "The twin bond, it was never truly severed, only hidden. If I can reach the part of her that Loki couldn't touch." She chose betrayal willingly, the corrupted Valkyrie interrupted, swooping down on wings of living shadow. "That choice binds her more surely than any chain." Era dodged the attack, her own power flaring as she called upon abilities she had kept hidden even from herself. Light poured from her hands, but it was not the pure radiance she had wielded before it was shot through, with threads of silver and gold that spoke of divine heritage long denied. "You're wrong," she said, confronting the Valkyrie directly. "Choice can be changed, corruption can be cleansed, and love can overcome even the lies of gods." The battle that erupted between them was fought as much in the realm of spirit as in the physical world. The Valkyrie's shadows sought to corrupt and consume, while Era's light sought to heal and restore. But this was not a simple contest of opposing forces, it was a struggle for the very nature of hope itself. Meanwhile, Grimr felt his connection to the material world growing thinner. His sacrifice had bought them time, but at a cost that grew greater with each passing moment. Through his fading senses, he could see Svala approaching, her face a mask of confusion and pain. "Brother warrior," she whispered, and for a moment her voice was purely her own, free of Loki's influence. "I'm sorry. I thought I was saving her, but I was only damning us all." "Redemption," Grimr managed to say, his voice growing fainter as his transformation progressed, "is always possible. But it requires... He struggled to find words that could carry meaning across the growing distance between his consciousness and human speech. It requires choosing love over fear, even when the cost is everything you thought you wanted. Understanding flickered in Svala's corrupted features. She looked toward where Era battled the Valkyrie, saw her sister pouring her very life force into the fight to restore what had been lost, and something inside her broke. "I choose differently," she said, and the words carried power that made the world tree's roots sing in harmony. "I choose my sister over my fear, love over the promise of safety, redemption over the comfort of damnation." She reached out, her hands trembling, and grasped Era's free hand, just as her sister delivered a blow of pure light that shattered the Valkyrie's shadow form. The moment their fingers touched, the corruption that had flowed through Svala began to burn away like morning mist before the sun. But more than that, their connection, the twin bond that had been the foundation of the original prophecy, blazed to life with power that transformed them both. Separately, they had been strong. Together, united in purpose and cleansed of deception, they became something that approached the divine. A crown of light formed around their joined heads, not a physical object, but a manifestation of their unified will, their shared determination to heal what had been broken. The power that flowed from their reunion was unlike anything Grimr had witnessed, even in his expanded state of consciousness. "The binding," Odin said, his voice filled with awe. "Not chains to hold chaos back, but harmony to transform it into something that serves creation rather than destroying it." Through the cracks in reality, Loki's voice rose in fury and disbelief. This was not foreseen. The prophecy spoke of division, of choice between binding and freedom. The prophecy, Era and Svala said in perfect unison, their voices carrying the weight of cosmic truth, spoke of twin daughters determining your fate. It never said how. With their bond restored and their power unified, Era and Svala stepped through the cracks in reality itself, entering the space between worlds where Loki had been imprisoned since the dawn of time. Grimr, existing now as a bridge between realms, felt his consciousness follow them into that place of absolute darkness and endless possibility. What they found there was not the monster of legend, not the scheming destroyer that gods and mortals feared, but something far more complex and heartbreaking. Loki hung, suspended in chains of crystallized suffering, his form bearing the marks of eons of torment. But more than his physical pain, it was his spiritual anguish that filled the void around them, the desperate loneliness of a being who had been cast out from everything he had once loved. "So," he said when he saw them approach, his voice carrying weary bitterness, "you have come to gloat over the chained god, to mock the one who dared challenge the order of things." "No," Era said softly, her light illuminating the prison that had held him for so long. "We've come to understand. The chains that bound Loki were not made of any earthly metal, but of crystallized moments, every betrayal he had committed, every lie he had told, every heart he had broken in his endless quest for freedom and acceptance. They were beautiful and terrible, refracting the light from Ira's power into rainbow patterns that showed the complexity of his crimes and motivations. Understanding changes nothing, Loki said, but there was something different in his voice. Now, hope perhaps, or merely the echo of what hope had once sounded like. "I am what I am, bound by the nature the All-Father gave me when he named me Lie-Smith and Oath-Breaker." "Names have power," Svala said, reaching toward one of the crystallized chains, "but they do not have to define us forever. I was corrupted, lost in darkness of my own choosing, but love brought me back." "Love," Loki laughed, but the sound held more pain than mockery. "What would you know of love? You, who betrayed your own sister for the promise of power." "I know that love forgives," Svala replied, her fingers touching the chain forged from her own betrayal. "I know that those we hurt can choose to heal us even when we don't deserve it." The chain began to crack. Under her touch, not from force but from the transformative power of genuine remorse meeting genuine forgiveness. Where her fingers contacted the crystallized betrayal, it dissolved into motes of silver light that danced around them like fireflies. "And I know," Ira added, grasping another chain, this one forged from the lies Loki had told to justify his pain, "that sometimes those who cause the most damage are those who have been damaged most deeply themselves." Under her touch, the chain of lies began to transform, not disappearing but changing into something else, truth wrapped in compassion, honesty tempered with mercy. The change sent ripples through all the other bonds, as if they were all connected at some fundamental level. Loki stared at them with eyes that held the depth of cosmic storms. "You seek to free me? After everything I have done, everything I have set in motion? The corruption I spread through your sister, the creatures I sent to hunt you, the very destruction of reality itself. We seek to transform you," they said together, their unified voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the prison dimension. "Freedom without wisdom is chaos, but wisdom without freedom is death. The balance between them is what creates true justice." From beyond the prison, Grimr's transformed consciousness reached out to them, his sacrifice having given him understanding that transcended mortal limitations. "The third artifact was never meant to be gathered," he said, his voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "It was meant to be given freely. My willing death, your willing forgiveness, these are the tools that can remake the bonds that hold reality together." Loki's chains were dissolving one by one as the twins continued their work, but something new was forming in their place, not bonds of punishment, but connections of responsibility. Where once there had been crystallized suffering, now there were threads of silver light that linked Loki to the realms he had sought to destroy, making him not their prisoner, but their guardian. "You would trust me with this?" Loki asked, wonder creeping into his voice as he felt the transformation taking hold. "After all I have done, trust must begin somewhere," Ira said simply. "And who better to guard against chaos," Svala added, "than one who understands its true nature?" The last chain dissolved, but Loki did not flee or seek revenge as they had all half expected. Instead, he knelt in the space between worlds, tears streaming down his face as he felt the weight of genuine forgiveness for the first time in eons. "I accept the burden," he said, formally. "I, who was the lie-smith, choose to become the guardian of truth. I, who was the oath-breaker, swear by bonds that cannot be broken to protect what I once sought to destroy." As he spoke, the silver threads linking him to the realms blazed with power, and through Grimr's expanded awareness, they could all feel reality itself healing, the cracks sealing as order and chaos found new balance. The god of lies had chosen to become something else entirely, not through force or punishment, but through the transformative power of mercy freely given and justice willingly accepted. The return to the World Tree was like awakening from a dream that had lasted lifetimes. The cracks in reality had sealed themselves, leaving only faint scars in the fabric of existence that served as reminders of how close all the realms had come to dissolution. The amber archway pulsed with renewed vitality, and Yggdrasil's branches swayed in cosmic winds that carried the songs of healing worlds. Grimr found himself standing once again in mortal flesh, though changed in ways both subtle and profound. The 3 deaths and resurrections had left their mark on him permanently. His eyes now held depths that spoke of journeys beyond the veil, and his hair bore streaks of silver that had not been there before his transformation. But he was alive, truly alive, in a way that made every breath a conscious choice rather than an automatic function. The 4th resurrection, Odin observed with a mixture of wonder and approval. Not given by fate this time, but earned through willing sacrifice. You have become something new. Grimr Thriceborn, a guardian who stands between the realms, watching over the balance you helped restore. Eira and Svala stood beside him, their twin bond now visible as threads of silver light that connected them across any distance. The corruption that had marked Svala was gone completely, replaced by wisdom that came from having touched darkness and chosen to return to the light. They were still sisters, still individuals, but also something more, a living symbol of how division could become unity without sacrificing what made each person unique. "What happens now?" Eira asked, though her question was directed as much to the cosmos itself as to the All-Father standing before them. "Now," Loki's voice answered from behind them, and they turned to see the transformed god approaching with steps that no longer shook reality with each footfall. He looked much as he always had, but the cruel mockery that had once lit his features was gone, replaced by something that might eventually become peace. Now we learn what it means to build rather than tear down, to heal rather than wound. He carried in his hands an object that pulsed with warm, golden light, the hearthstone of new beginnings, a gift from the world tree itself in recognition of the choice he had made. When he offered it to them, Grimr felt its power immediately, not the force to destroy or command, but the gentler strength to create sanctuary wherever it was needed. "A token," Loki said simply, "and a promise. Where this stone rests, there will always be shelter for those who need it, warmth for those who are cold, and hope for those who have lost their way." Grimr accepted the stone, feeling its warmth spread through his hands and up his arms until it settled in his chest like a second heart. "You're giving this to us?" "I am giving it to the world," Loki corrected. "Through you, who understand that true strength comes from knowing when not to use it. Through them, who proved that even the deepest betrayals can be healed by genuine forgiveness." The journey back to Midgard was accomplished not through the treacherous paths between realms, but by Odin's direct intervention, a rainbow bridge that deposited them on the familiar slopes of the Whitefang Mountains, just as the sun was setting behind the peaks. The sight of home brought tears to Grimr's eyes, though whether they were tears of joy or sorrow, he could not say. His cave was as he had left it, but it felt different now, not like a hermit's retreat from the world, but like a way station for travelers who needed rest and guidance. The hearthstone, when placed on the simple wooden table where they had first planned their impossible quest, transformed the entire space. The walls seemed to expand without changing size. The fire burned with warmth that had nothing to do with fuel, and the very air carried the promise that anyone who came here with genuine need would find welcome. "This will be our home," Eira said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "All of us." Svala nodded, her hand finding her sister's with unconscious ease. "The prophecy is fulfilled, but the work is just beginning. There will be others who need guidance, who face impossible choices, who wonder if redemption is possible. And there will be those," Grimr added, thinking of the corrupted creatures they had fought, the Valkyrie whose shadow form had been shattered but whose essence might yet be saved, who need to learn that transformation is always possible, that no one is beyond hope if they are willing to change. In the months that followed, word spread through the northern lands of a place in the high mountains where strangers were always welcome, where the impossible became possible, and where 3 guardians helped lost souls find their way. They came seeking many things: healing from old wounds, forgiveness for past mistakes, the strength to face uncertain futures. Grimr found that his warrior skills had not diminished, but they served a different purpose now. Where once he had fought to protect the innocent, now he fought to defend the possibility of redemption itself. Eira's powers grew stronger with each act of healing she performed, her light becoming a beacon that could be seen from vast distances by those who truly needed guidance. And Svala, perhaps changed most of all by their journey, became a counselor for those who struggled with their own capacity for darkness, showing them that the choice between corruption and redemption was one that could be made anew each day. Sometimes On clear nights when the aurora danced overhead in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, they would see a figure moving through the lights, Loki, in his new role as guardian of truth, watching over the realms he had once sought to destroy. He never visited directly, but his presence was a reminder that even the most profound transformations began with a single choice: to be better than what you were before. The hearthstone pulsed gently on its wooden table, casting warm light on three faces that had found not the ending they expected, but the beginning they needed. Outside, winter winds still howled through the peaks, but inside their sanctuary, the fire burned eternal. A promise that no matter how dark the night became, morning would always come for those brave enough to keep hope alive.